Welcome to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Today's August 12th, getting started with our daily update. A lot of news anyway, a lot of it coming from Major League Baseball, surprisingly, on a day when I thought we'd be covering a lot of football. But without further ado, let's get right into it. Right off the bat, let's start with the Fernando Tatis Jr. news. He has been suspended by Major League Baseball after testing positive for a banned substance that he said he was using in a treatment to take care of ringworm. Unfortunately, when you're a baseball player, especially one of his caliber, coming off of multiple motorcycle accidents this offseason, having professed to the team that you're all about the team, that you're looking to get things right back back in the right order anyway. Welcome back, Ryan. You really can't have things like this. I'll read a quote to you from AJ Preller in just a minute, but just looking at the suspension itself, for the rest of the year, Tatis is going to be out. Next year, he's going to miss at least a little bit of time because that 80-game suspension will eat into next year as well. So even after having missed 3 months of the season now because of an injury he suffered in a motorcycle accident, not just one accident, but multiple accidents apparently this offseason, now more character questions are coming up for Fernando Tatis. We'll get in, like I said, we'll get into AJ Preller's comments in a minute, but just from a team building perspective, they just made the big investment of going after Juan Soto. They're going to give him that $500 million contract. And I think this suspension absolutely guarantees that contract gets done now, just because I think Soto's going to have so much leverage. That deal is going to have to get done in order for the Padres to be able to make that deal worth it going forward. Because right now you have a superstar in Fernando Tatis Jr. that you can't count on to be there anymore. So without further ado, let's kind of look at the quote that AJ Preller had anyway. I was very. If you guys had listened to my podcast that I just put out this morning anyway, giving you my playoff predictions anyway, I had the Padres going all the way to the World Series, assuming Fernando Tatis Jr. would be back. Right now, I don't think that's going to be the case. Not even, 6 hours after I post that podcast, the information comes out that he was suspended for 80 games. I think that pretty much ends the title hopes of this year of the Padres. And you can kind of feel the frustration in Preller's quote anyway that he had. So let's get right to it. All right. Preller, when speaking with the media, said he only found out a couple hours into this afternoon anyway. Said over the course of the last 6 or 7 months, I think trust has been something that we have never really been able to have, presumably referencing his motorcycle accident that fractured his wrist. Preller continued, I think we're hoping that from the offseason to now that there would have been some maturity, and obviously with the news today, it's more of a pattern and something we're going to have to dig it a little bit more into. I'm sure he's very disappointed, but at the end of the day, it's one thing to say it. You have to start showing it with your actions. Wow, this isn't the, hey, we're standing behind him. We understand it's a mistake. We're really excited to have him back next year, blah, 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 that you see from typical executives. That coming from AJ Preller shows the organization is really thrown by this. I would not be surprised to see his name actually start to pop up in the rumor mill, especially after the season is over. Shortstop market's going to be hot this winter as well. Maybe even San Diego now looks at going after a shortstop. I thought that they were going to experiment with him in center field during his rehab assignment as a, hey, maybe the shortstop, we're going to have Kim there for this year, and maybe we sign somebody in the offseason and really get this team going. But now I'm wondering if the Padres are going to start considering signing a shortstop, period, even in the event that Fernando Tatis Jr. is there. And I understand this is still very reactionary, and we're only, 8 hours after the suspension was announced. But the San Diego Padres really are under behind the 8 ball on this one anyway. They did bring in Juan Soto, Josh Bell, Brandon Drury. They look like they were ready to go. That starting staff that they had so many issues with last year is performing very well this year. They've been consistent for pretty much the entire year. Of course, they still have areas that they could improve with Blake Snell and Sean Manaea, but for the most part, that starting staff has been there. The bullpen, of course, got an upgrade with Josh Hader. They look like they were ready to go, and then you have this happen. Absolutely a gut punch to that organization. They've invested so much in this team. Their payroll has jumped over $100 million in a span of 2 years, and it projects to jump another $50 million next year. I understand the frustration for AJ Preller. I really do. Fernando Tatis Jr., you're a heck of a player. But what are you doing? At this point, you've said all the right things to all the right people for months and months and months, and then this happens. I'm sorry, Fernando Tatis Jr. I just don't need to hear it anymore. I need to see the positive action behind those things. So, for those of you who are Dodger fans, this might be a day for you to celebrate, honestly. But for the player, Fernando Tatis Jr., this is going to be a lot about growth over the next 6 to 8 months while he's going to be out for 80 games. Um, I, for the Padres organization, where do you go from here? Thank you for the like. Appreciate that. I mean, for the organization, Fernando Tatis Jr. was the linchpin of this thing going forward. Um, Young, productive, athletic, able to move around the diamond a little bit if you need him to, as they're showing by playing him a little bit in center field in his rehab assignment. That effectively is shut down immediately now. But Fernando Tatis Jr. is out for 80 games, and I'm wondering if the San Diego Padres organization after this season is going to take a deep look and say, hey, is this the guy that we should build our lineup around, seeing as how he hasn't been able to play in 162 games now this year? Well, the suspension is going to eliminate him from postseason contention anyway. I mean, as far as do the playoff games count towards that suspension, I'm not entirely sure. But in either event, even if it didn't count towards the suspension, he's still going to miss time next year. Even if it did, he would still miss time next year. There's not enough games in the year for all 80 games to be gone. And yeah, I don't think he's going to be available for the postseason. But in either event, this is not a good thing for the San Diego Padres. The one thing I'm curious about is what they're going to do next in response to this. Are they going to look in their organization and say, Juan Soto, you're now the face of this franchise, not Fernando Tatis Jr.? Manny Machado, you're now going to be counted on a little bit more. And then we're going to dig into free agency and get that shortstop, bring him in here. And then do they sell Fernando Tatis after they bring in that shortstop? Maybe there's a team out there that will say, hey, we'll take those character concerns that you have. We'll bet on that talent. There will be more than a few teams willing to bet on that talent and say, hey, maybe this was just an honest mistake, and maybe these are the penalties of being so young. You know, the motorcycle accidents, not just one but multiple this offseason, resulting in a fractured wrist, and then not showing up to a training camp and saying, hey, oh, I guess I do have an injury, my bad, I didn't get it taken care of. Fernando Tatis Jr., you sound a massive contract extension. It's on you to take care of yourself in those situations. You're a grown adult now. And I'm sorry, San Diego Padre fans. I know this is a very tough day for you, but I think you've got to look inward and say, hey, as good as Fernando Tatis Jr. is, do we need to shift those assets around? Do we need to move him in order to get back some of those assets we lost in the Juan Soto deal? Bring in a shortstop in free agency. There's going to be a number of them out there. Absolutely. What a selfish player. That is absolutely correct for you to say. I mean, I'm a big AJ Preller fan of what he's done with that organization. Even back to the days when he basically pushed all the chips to the center and said, "The heck with it, I'm going for it. I'm getting Craig Kimbrell, Justin Upton, BJ Upton," and then he had the wherewithal to say, "Hey, this isn't working," and flipped him. Not even 4 months later. I understand that wasn't exactly the best move for that organization, but he gave that organization a chance. It didn't work. He recognized it and fixed his mistake. Now Fernando Tatis Jr. is there. He's built around that. He got a great contract extension there. He got Manny Machado there. He got Eric Hosmer there when no free agent was coming to San Diego. He was the first free agent to come to San Diego. He was the one that got the dominoes moving. Now Eric Hosmer's gone, of course. You bring in Juan Soto. You got to sign him to an extension. Is Josh Bell going to be signed to an extension? There's a lot of questions right now in San Diego after this suspension. I mean, absolute gut punch, especially with that offense finally starting to hum over the past couple of days. They were expecting to have him back probably middle of the week next week, and now he's going to be out until the early part of next season. It's still too early to really, judge whether or what the next step is for the Padres organization. Just looking at the quote, how deflated that organization is right now, they need to assess what actually happened for one, because they literally found out about it 2 hours before we did. They had no idea this was happening, and just can you imagine getting that call from the Major League office? Hey, AJ Preller, this is the commissioner, Rob Manfred, just calling to let you know that your star shortstop that you're expecting to count on as down the stretch here, he's now going to be out for the rest of the year due to an 80-game suspension for a banned substance. What an absolute gut punch of a day for AJ Preller. I'm feeling for you, man. I hope everything gets a little bit better as this season goes along, and maybe you can recover in time for the postseason. That way you don't get knocked out in the wild card round. But wow, that's a tough break. But we'll get back to the Juan Soto news here in just a minute. But let's kind of go through the rest of the news from around baseball. The Baltimore Orioles, who are charging in the American League wild card standings anyway, are set to promote D.L. Hall, their top starting pitcher. Has monster raw stuff anyway, but comes with that raw stuff anyway is going to be control issues. So we'll see if he's able to maintain the strike zone there. Other news anyway, Tyler Duffy, who was released from the Twins, has signed a minor league deal with the Rangers. Tarek Skubal, the Tiger starter, who was mentioned around the deadline as a possible option for a number of teams looking for starting pitching, is going to be out for the year after surgery. The Mariners have DFA'd former top reliever Ken Giles and Michael Brantley. We've talked about him the last couple of days for the Houston Astros. He was seeking a second opinion yesterday. Well, that second opinion came back in the negative, obviously. He's been out since about June anyway. And he's going to have season-ending shoulder surgery, and so they won't have that bat in that lineup as they go to the postseason. So beware, Astros fans. You have a great rotation, but now you have issues with that lineup. You didn't bring in a center fielder, and now you're not going to have Brantley the rest of the way. We'll see if they can continue to hold on to the best record in the American League with the Yankees right behind them. Last news is that the Chicago Cubs are expected to be very active in free agency this offseason. They invested a little bit this year with Marcus Stroman. Expect them to go in heavy this offseason, possibly even in on the top starting pitcher on the market, Carlos Rodon. There's a couple other starters they could use or they could go after anyway. But the shortstop class is really what this year's going to be all about. Maybe they dip their toe in that market. They still have Nico Horner there, so I don't know if they'll really go that high for him. But they are expected to spend money in free agency this year. Moving on to the NFL. For those of you wondering, is Jimmy Garoppolo going to end up staying in San Francisco this year? No, he's not. The San Francisco 49ers have basically said before the beginning of the season, he will be either traded or cut, one of the two. So that tells you the trade value for him isn't very high right now, mainly because of the shoulder injury that he had. Teams weren't willing to trade for him around the draft time. And so they waited until training camp to kind of roll around to see how that shoulder recovered from his injury. All reports seem to be that things are going well for him. Traded to the Jets? I didn't see that yet. Oh, should be traded to the Jets. I don't know about that. I mean, they still have Zach Wilson there, but we'll get. I got a little bit of news on this anyway, but the San Francisco 49ers are not going to have Jimmy Garoppolo there. Trey Lance is the man, and we just saw him throw a 70-yard touchdown pass in a preseason game today. Granted, it's preseason, but the era of Trey Lance has begun with the San Francisco 49ers. Yet another day with more news out of the Chicago Bears. Not just injury news, not just Roquan Smith news, but apparently they're now waiting to extend running back David Montgomery. Ryan Poles, the new GM there of the Chicago Bears, has made a number of peculiar decisions so far this offseason, trading away getting rid of much of their front seven. That was what they were known for a number of years, trading away Khalil Mack and having issues now with Roquan Smith. And now looking at the offensive side of the ball, they traded for N'Keal Harry. He's going to be out for 8 weeks. David Montgomery is basically the best player on that offense outside of Justin Fields. We'll see if he can become a great quarterback. But for David Montgomery, now they're not even going to negotiate with him on an extension. I wonder what this means for his future going forward. Are they going to tag him, which most teams nowadays look to tag maybe once, maybe even twice, and then get rid of you? So maybe that's the path Ryan Poles is going to take in his first year as GM of the Bears. More news out of the NFL is that Deshaun Watson, he was given a 6-game suspension by Sue Robinson, the arbiter anyway. Now that case has been appealed to Peter Harvey, the NFL hoping to get at least a year in suspension and hopefully an indefinite suspension is what they're ultimately wanting. Watson actually expressed remorse for the first time publicly today for all of his victims that he had. And yes, victims is the correct word. Nobody should have to go through what he did. And unfortunately, the Browns just had a lapse in judgment, honestly, in my opinion. They gave him $230 million completely guaranteed, basically a slap in the face to the entire system. And I understand that it's not necessarily about the system. It's about those victims. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. But I do worry about what this means for Deshaun Watson going forward. I expect this is going to be moved to a year-long suspension. That's what seems to be the reports right now for Deshaun Watson. And if they do end up getting that indefinite suspension anyway, I got to wonder, when will he be back? Now that he's finally expressed remorse anyway, almost a full year plus after the first allegations were levied against him. We'll see what the NFL ultimately ends up deciding to do. But it seems like that decision is expected to be soon, and the Cleveland Browns are expected to make a move at quarterback. They have a couple of good backups there, but they're backup quarterbacks at this point in their career. Jacoby Brissett is not a NFL starting level or starting caliber quarterback, so maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, who's been mentioned a few times over the past week, could be an option there. So we'll kind of get right into that now. Jimmy Garoppolo is apparently being monitored by the Cleveland Browns anyway, while they look for a new quarterback. Other teams are still levying whether or not they're going to be interested. Mainly the Seattle Seahawks, the Atlanta Falcons, the New York Giants as well have all been monitoring his situation. Now with the Browns being poised for a playoff run this year, if Deshaun Watson was healthy, they will not have him this year. So maybe they turn to Jimmy Garoppolo for at least 1 year and eat that salary, or most of that salary anyway, as they have the room to take it on for that starting quarterback. So the Browns are going to be making a move at quarterback. We'll see if they end up going for Jimmy Garoppolo. Last news out of the NFL is that the New England Patriots have at least decided on some play calling on the offensive side of the ball. Matt Patricia and Joe Judge are now going to split the offensive coordinator duties there. Everybody thought it was going to be Bill Belichick's son making the calls there on offense. No, it will be Patricia and Judge. Patricia made the play calls for Hoyer in the preseason game, while Judge made the calls for the fourth-round pick Zappo. We'll see which one ultimately gets the job during the season, but it seems like they're going with the returning coaches anyway to the Patriots in Patricia and Judge at that coordinator spot. Flipping on to the NBA, there was not too much news there. The only actual signing was the Rockets signed Willie Cauley-Stein to a 1-year deal. Terms were not disclosed. They have a number of players already under contract, so we'll see if they actually have to cut somebody to make that move happen. There was also an article out today that maybe LeBron will consider a Kevin Durant-style trade request to try to get out of LA. I think this is purely conjecture at this point, but it's been picked up by a number of different news outlets. I don't think it's going to end up happening. It sounds like LeBron ultimately does want to finish his career in LA. If Bronny does get drafted to another team, then and only then do I expect LeBron to try to move elsewhere. He just seems content with where he's at now. He's ready to just win games and just stay at home, that kind of thing. He's not necessarily going to be seeking, he's not going to be title chasing anyway, like you might have seen for Karl Malone or Gary Payton towards the end of their careers. The NHL, anyway, there was zero news anyway out of the NHL. The only thing is that the Chicago Blackhawks, of course, continue to redefine their rebuild. They're not going to be competitive this year at all. They only signed 1-year deals to a couple of free agents that have been known to be on losing teams in the past. So maybe this is kind of the race to the bottom for the Blackhawks, getting players that they know have flaws in their game and possibly have those flaws keep them out of winning close games. As far as the Blackhawks go, they have Patrick Kane, Jonathan Taves, and Seth Jones all under contract. The worst contract in all of the NHL right now is probably Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn, one of those from the Dallas Stars. But right there with them is Jonathan Taves. Almost all of that deal is dead money at this point. He doesn't give you the production that you need to for that $10.5 million paycheck that he's getting. Seth Jones, because he's been on a bad team that gives up goals constantly, his numbers have not looked very good compared to his time in Columbus. So that the return in a trade for him isn't going to be very high either. The only thing the Blackhawks can really do to try to regain some prospect value out of the three of those is trading away Patrick Kane. He's been unbelievable talent for a number of years, possibly one of the best, if not the best American skater ever. I still believe Mike Modano is that guy, but Patrick Kane is right there. And so I expect he's probably going to request a trade. If I had to guess right now, before the trade deadline is where I expect it to happen. But that's a lot of salary to move. We'll see if a team can get it done during the season or even beforehand. So just to kind of recap everything, Fernando Tatis Jr. out for 80 games after testing positive for clostebol. I guess that's how you pronounce it anyway. But it's a banned substance anyway. Apparently he was taking a medication for ringworm. But yeah, it doesn't look good for the Padres. The Orioles are promoting their top pitching prospect as they try to ramp up towards the end of the season, trying to steal a wild card spot. In the NFL, Trey Lance had his first preseason game today, threw a 70-yard touchdown pass to Gray anyway. Deshaun Watson, of course, is now expected to be out for a year once the decision comes down from Harvey. And he actually did express remorse for the first time. Jimmy Garoppolo apparently is on the radar for the Browns. In the NBA, not much happening along with the NHL. But just to kind of wrap things up with the Fernando Tatis Jr. news, maybe Buffalo, he's from there. Yeah, just to kind of wrap up the Fernando Tatis news, for a team that's invested as much as they have in that starting staff, they have a lot of money up there. You look at Nick Martinez, they signed to a 4-year, $20 million deal. They took on the big contract from the Cubs and Yu Darvish. They gave a huge extension now to Joe Musgrove. Um, Blake Snell, of course, they have under contract. Mike Clevenger, they made the big investment in a trade for last year. Of course, he was out with Tommy John. They've made a lot of moves to make this a very competitive team. They even traded away Eric Hosmer and are eating every cent of that deal just to make sure there's extra roster space and extra flexibility as they get ready for October. And ultimately, it's gone for naught. Fernando Tatis Jr. made one of the most selfish decisions he can by having multiple motorcycle accidents, fracturing his wrist, and not taking care of it in the offseason, reporting to training camp and saying, "Oh, I guess I've got a broken wrist," and it was missed 3 months. As he was poised to get back from that, apparently he had a condition for ringworm anyway, and he took a medication. You got to be careful with what you're putting in your body. As a Major League Baseball player, there is no excuse to not know what you're putting in your body. Everybody is looking at what you're putting in your body. You have 3 or 4 different people telling you, "Hey, this is okay," or "Hey, this is not okay," and yet he still made or found a way to make a poor decision. Looking at AJ Preller's comments that he made, there's been a lot of great lip service given by Fernando Tatis Jr. saying all the right things. Hey, I'll take better care of myself. I won't make selfish decisions like crashing my motorcycle multiple times and not taking care of injuries when I get them. And then you have this happen. Just more accountability issues for Fernando Tatis Jr. If I'm the Padres, I have serious questions about his future with this organization based on how much you've invested in that team. You now have a new aircraft carrier in Juan Soto that you can build around if you choose to get rid of Fernando Tatis Jr., which ultimately I think is on the table now. We'll see how he ends up responding to this suspension. But ultimately, suspensions are never a good thing for the player. The only one I can think of in recent memory that's actually continued to play very well after a suspension was Nelson Cruz. His suspension came when he was with the Baltimore Orioles, I believe, and he's still in the league right now. He's finally showing the signs of aging anyway, a great power hitter. But once you have these suspension issues, they kind of lag behind you the rest of your career. We'll see how he ends up going forward. Emmanuel Clase had a suspension anyway a couple of years ago with the Indians after he was traded there from the Rangers. He's become one of the top 5 closers in the league. He's another good example of rebounding from a suspension. If you're the Padres, you've got to hope for that type of rebound from Fernando Tatis Jr. But this is just an absolute lack of judgment here for Fernando Tatis. He's got a former baseball player for a dad in Fernando Tatis Sr. anyway. If you might remember him having the 2 grand slams in 1 inning when he was a member of the St. Louis Cardinals back when Mark McGuire was there and all them boys. But there's no excuse for him to not know what he's putting into his body. He's grown up around it his entire career with his dad when he was growing up anyway, when he was younger. And now he's been in the MLB for a number of years. He's one of the top players in the league. He's been injured for a number of months. And now, just as he's getting back, he tests positive for a banned substance. Just an absolute lack of judgment. I understand the disappointment AJ Preller is feeling. The comments that he had weren't exactly the most friendly, I'll say, towards Fernando Tatis Jr., basically saying lack of maturity, lip service, no follow up or follow through based on those words. We need to see action, not just words. It's not just the typical, "Hey, we got his back," blah, blah, blah. We're excited to see him back next year. We look forward to, continuing to have him a part of our franchise. None of that was said by AJ Preller. Instead, we got, "Hey, we've been told this number of times by Fernando Tatis Jr. that he's on the right track. He's taking care of himself. He's doing so much better." And then you're completely blindsided by this anyway. And I can understand the raw emotion Preller was feeling in that press conference, but the Padres have some soul searching to do. And Fernando Tatis Jr., you got to do better. I really hope you understand the mistake that you made by doing this. Even if it was just an honest mistake, you still need to do better. And for the San Diego Padre fans out there, sorry for your team. If you'd listened to my podcast that I put out this morning, I picked the Padres to go to the World Series. That is now completely gone, in my opinion. That starting staff, as good as they are, they needed to have a little bit more punch in that lineup. a little bit more energy, and Fernando Tatis brings that in spades. But as mercurial of a talent as he is, you get all the highs and now you get all the lows with it. So we'll see what the Padres are going to do going forward. I think they're going to build around Juan Soto. They can't necessarily count on Tatis Jr. going forward until he at least shows over a consistent period of time through his actions, not just his words, that he's shown to be an improving player, somebody who's growing as far as maturity. But for the Padres fans out there, so sorry for you guys. Dodgers, I think you've officially sewn up the division now. Um, Ultimately, I think if you paid any attention to the podcast anyway, I picked the Padres to beat the Braves in the wild card round, the Dodgers in the divisional round. Now, both of those are in question for me because I do like the moves the Braves have made. They probably still beat the Braves, in my opinion, but I think the Dodgers end up beating them in the NL divisional series. But thank you guys for joining us for our daily update here on August 12th. We will have a live tomorrow with the Rams and Chargers game, and then following we'll have our daily update after that. Sorry for you guys who are Padres fans. It's been a tough day for you guys. Browns fans, it's been a tough year, honestly, for you. All the news around Deshaun Watson, the ups and downs of signing him to a contract, all the things he's done off the field. Jimmy Garoppolo might be coming there now and might not excite you, but at least he's a lot better than Jacoby Brissett. And for 1 year, at least having Jimmy G there to lead the way, you could do worse. That's a run-first offense anyway. He comes from a run-first offense with the 49ers, so that will kind of the chemistry there hopefully will move a little faster. They did bring in Amari Cooper, a nice weapon on the outside, so they seem ready to go. They just need a quarterback to lead them this year until Watson can return to the field. But thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you guys tomorrow. And as always, make sure you hit that subscribe button here on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at UpsideSN. And now with our, you can find us on Spotify as well for our new podcast. Thank you guys, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.